Hello. I think we're ready to get going here. Yeah, we're going to get started with today's history chats in just a couple minutes at 12:30. Yeah, thanks for joining us. If you're watching live, hang out for we're going to be about 2 minutes. I'm trying this thing where I'm not going to go. We don't need the full 5 minutes to get started, so we'll see how this works. But yeah, so it'll be about 2 minutes if you're watching after the fact. The recording, you can skip ahead about 2 minutes, and that'll take you to the programming. But in the meantime, here is some stuff that I can tell you about here. So today we're talking, continuing our March MAPness theme, which is the concept. This is next week's, but hold on, let me. Nope, that's the wrong thing. Okay, I guess I didn't have that graphic queued up. That's all right. We're going to continue this theme throughout March. We're taking, for example, next week we're going to take, you can see the background here. This is the a 1948, I think, map of all the school districts in Marathon County. And so we'll show you the full thing and the story and what the significance of that is next week. So that's our topic next week. Yeah, just let you know about that now. Also, speaking of stuff coming up, our next History Speaks series is going to be coming up in the first weekend of April, so the 2nd on Saturday. It's a 2 p.m. thing. This will be a hybrid in-person again, and as well as we'll have some, I don't know if it'll be live streamed, if we can make the technology work right away, but I will definitely have the recording done, and that'll be put up for people who can't join us live for that. But that's going to be about William Jennings Bryan, great progressive politician and figure in American history, and Paul Clark from Wausau East High School, the history department there. He's going to be telling you about William Jennings Bryan, and including some stuff about when he came here, because he did stop here at least once. So that's what's coming up. Look forward to that. But today we're talking about a different map, different program, and I'm going to introduce now and turn it over to Gary to talk about this unique thing. Let me just make sure you're good.
Great, thank you, Ben. Welcome this afternoon. Well, in continuing the story of maps this month, we're decided to look at a certain map. This is the map 1879. Bird's eye view of the city of Wausau. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about bird's eye views. You see these pretty much all over. There's another one of Wausau, I think, in the 1890s. But this one I think I chose because it's close to 1872. This year we're acknowledging 150 years of Wausau's history. So I thought this sort of gives us a little bit of a glimpse of what Wausau was like around in the 1870s. It just shows us what was going on, what was important, and what lingered. So there are things here in this map we're going to show you today that is with us today. But of course, there are things that also disappeared, but key elements, I believe, in our history. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's considering 150 years, a lot of things have pretty much stayed the same. So we'll talk about that also. So this is another map in the 1870s. This is just pretty much a straight-on view. One of the consistencies between this map and that bird's eye map was the railroad. You can see that pretty much hems in the growth of the city at this time, which speaks to a little bit of a cutout of the bird's eye map, because I wanted to show what I think is a key part of our history. It's the railroad coming into the city of Wausau, what became the Milwaukee Road. Here it comes up from New Lisbon, making the circle around the city. And of course, if it wouldn't be for the railroad, this railroad coming into the city, that would be surrounding the city, working the sawmills, working the manufacturing plants, working all that, in addition to bringing in the passengers if it wouldn't have been for that railroad, and the railroad that would come a little bit later, the Chicago Northwestern, Wausau would be a completely different city. So I point this out. Here it is. Of course, it went away later on. Passenger service disappeared. Railroad service is no longer what it was back in the day, but still a key ingredient happening in the 1870s. That was an important part of our history. So I want to narrow in on a certain neighborhood in the city at this time, and this is, some of this may look familiar to you. It's the Grant. I think it's called the South Line Road at that time. Now it's called, of course, Grand Avenue. And one of the major themes throughout the history that I like to talk about is the growth of the churches, the settlement of the people coming into this community, and right away they were developing their churches, their church schools. And I point the center church there that I marked is St. Mary's Catholic Church. The other one, which we'll speak about in a minute, to the left is Zion Lutheran Church. This is a very German neighborhood. Both churches were German. The Reuter Brewery is, of course, across the street. But St. Mary's Catholic Church, 1850s settlement here on Grand Avenue. Eventually, they would build a very large Gothic church on Grand Avenue. This is their home today. I'll be a little too quickly there. Zion Lutheran Church, a few blocks away from St. Mary's in the neighborhood, started in 1874. This was their little church, and this is where they are today. So again, both churches starting in the 1870s. We'll be talking about a little bit more churches a little bit later, but these two churches off of Grand Avenue settled and are still part of our community today. So next, I want to talk a little bit about the center city. I want to point out to downtown what we would consider downtown Wausau today. So there are two buildings, the arrow on the right pointing to a courthouse, and the arrow on the left pointing to McCrossin's general store, both here in the 1870s. This is the second courthouse for Marathon County on what we now call the 400 block. It was there in the 1870s serving Marathon County. Of course, we don't have to talk too much about the history of Marathon County itself, but here is our second courthouse in the 1870s serving Marathon County. And then just across the street is the McCrossin building. You can see on the top, James McCrossin, he had this general store. Of course, lawyers on the second floor. This is what the building came to look like in a few years. It is still there. It is clad now in brick, but that building there in the 1870s continues to be a part of our downtown. Of course, the courthouse moved, the third courthouse got destroyed, razed, and now we have a new courthouse on Forest Street. But again, a part of our history there in downtown Wausau with the courthouse. And another important part of our history, of our landscape here in the city of Wausau, was the river. And I can go on and talk a little bit about this, but the key parts of the river was the bridge, the Scott Street Bridge, coming across the east bank of the river, coming, of course, eventually over to the west side. You can see not much development on the west side, but the Scott Street Bridge is there. The city is starting to take place. And then below that, the bridge over the falls. So here we see a picture of the falls, the Big Bull Falls, the Great Falls, serving the power of the sawmills for many years. It's there, starting a little bit north of the Scott Street Bridge. And then we see an unusual picture of the Barker Stewart Island to your left, because that's vacant at this point in time. So the whole Barker Stewart sawmill has yet to come, but that eventually will be taking up that whole large island, and working the sawmills for many years, providing a lot of employment, a lot of industry for the city for many years. Of course, the river takes a different shape up to your right. The sawmills are starting. The Plummer sawmill was there off of Clark's Island. And of course, the big Alexander Stewart sawmill was there. So these two sawmills, plus a lot of other sawmills, were a key ingredient in the early years of the Wisconsin River and employment economy of what we came to know as the Wisconsin River, the pinery. So then I change forces a little bit. I'm going to come downtown again, that little building on what we would see as Fifth Street, and I think that would be Washington Street. It was the first public school in this city. So in the 1870s, we already had two schools clearly visible on the bird's eye map. This is the White School, which was more of an elementary school, a primary school in the early days. This is another map. This map I showed you years ago in another history chat, but the primary school there on your left. Across the street and on another block on the Jefferson Street and what would come to be called 6th Street is what at that time was the Humboldt School. That served as a high school, sort of the upper grades of the school year. This was the Humboldt School, and this is the high school on your right. So that was on 6th Street. The White School was on 5th Street, and the high school was on 6th Street. So then I come to downtown again, to 3rd Street. Take a look at the little, on your left, there's a little odd-shaped building with that little pointed roof. So remember, this is in the 1870s. So what do we have well into the 1980s? This little building on the corner of Washington Street and 3rd Street, of course, went away when the new mall was built. But this little building served as a printery house for a variety of other businesses through the many years, through that 100 years of being on this corner. And one of the landmarks, really, of downtown Wausau that went away when the Wausau Mall came in, serving that place for, like I say, over 100 years. I want to turn back again and talk a little bit about that favorite subject of mine is the churches in downtown Wausau, because we can see, in addition to St. Mary's and Zion off of Grand Avenue, now we're downtown, and let me just back up this little church on 2nd and McClellan. I'm sorry, this would be on Grant Street. This is 2nd and Grant. A little church starting, and this was the beginning over 150 years ago of the First Methodist Church. Of course, they moved on to a variety of other buildings through the years, but their first place was on 2nd and Grant Street. The next little church was on McClellan, number 10 within that box, and that was the beginning sanctuary of the First Presbyterian Church. Of course, they started there over 150 years ago. They eventually moved up to the 400 block of Grant Street, with their second and third sanctuaries up there. But the First Presbyterian, again, another old congregation of this city. And then finally, we come to, again, up the street on McClellan was the beginning years of the St. John's Episcopal Church. And in the early days, this was St. John's in the Wilderness, eventually became St. John's the Baptist Episcopal Church on McClellan Street. This is their sanctuary today. Again, signaling the fact that a lot of churches were started in these early days that really gave the foundation to the congregations, the religious life of the city for many, many years. And let me back up. This church is on Washington Street, perhaps the oldest congregation in the city of Wausau, 5th and Washington Streets. In the early days, it was St. Paul's Evangelical and Reformed Church. Today, this is their church, and this is their church today, St. Paul's Evangelical and Reformed Church, becoming St. Paul's United Church of Christ. And I close with this little picture of the railroad, because I can't emphasize enough the importance of this railroad in the 1870s, serving this community very strongly through the 1950s, and it made Wausau really, it put Wausau on the map. And these maps that we are telling about this month in March, indicate really our history. So the strong connection between the 1870s and today's 2022 is revealed in the things that were there, that are still there, but if they have gone away, they really were an important part of our history. The story continues, but the story is ever present in our history of the city of Wausau. So with that, I turn it back to Ben.
Well, I guess while you're talking, the map itself, do we know who drew it, why, when?
We don't.
We don't. Okay. Because it says it's a bird's eye view, but it's not. It's an artist rendering of it, right? So, which is, as you said at the beginning, kind of common for this era. Do we know if is there anything that we are missing? Because you kind of see what Wausau looked like at that point. No? Well, you did a pretty good job of getting everything in there?
Well, I tried. I mean, you can go on and on and on, but within my little bit of time, I thought I would perhaps hit the highlights of what was there then, what has maybe gone away, but yet what continues.
Okay. So as far as we know, it's a good map.
It's a good map.
You can use it to find your way around.
Yes, it's a good map. It's a good map. It tells the story of Wausau in the 1870s as we became a city.
Okay. All right. Well, I think I guess that's what we have for today. Again, I'll just let you know if you didn't catch us at the beginning. Next week, we're going to continue the theme for maps and look specifically at a county-wide map in 1848. I think someone did a survey of all of the county school districts, of which there were over 200. So we're going to look at the full map and try to what does it show and what were all of these school districts looking like. So that'll be next week at 12:30 again on Thursday. So we'll look forward to that and more maps to come this month. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us. I don't see any questions. I don't think yet. So yeah. Oh, I guess I'm guessing this is Cheryl here. It's a Marathon County Historical Society. Yeah. Gary, are there cemeteries on the map? Did they plot those in those days? Because I don't see Pine
I
Grove.
think Pine Grove would not be on the map as yet, because the further, if you look at the map, the further south as going, it's somewhere around Town Line Road, I think, is about as far as the bird saw in his field of vision. He's just seeing that Town Line Road, not carrying down to Pine Grove Cemetery.
Okay. And I'm guessing at this point there weren't, too many other cemeteries to choose from, and maybe they just decided, hey, we're not going to bother putting them.
Everything sort of is accumulated. He got Pine Grove Cemetery.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Well, thanks again, Gary, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. And we'll see you next time. Have a wonderful week in the meantime.